a good wank-off session, Moxie?
Look, I don't care where you come in the living world, just come to your job on time.
Hey, so, you ever have that feeling where you want to make a video on something popular because you have a naughty contrarian opinion on something, or I don't know what people make these days that's successful? I'd like to go back to before the bridge incident, please. This website used to be fun at some point. We're not even a minute in and I'm already derailing. Helluva Boss is a spin-off series that started with a pilot that was a spin-off of a pilot that is apparently getting its own television series, so congratulations to Vivzipop, I guess. Many of you know this specific series is quite the hot topic because people either love it or think it's the spawn of Satan, which regardless of the irony there, really makes me question whether I'm normal for thinking it's simply alright. It's true that I have defended Luigi's Has-Been Mansion and Vivzipop in the past, and I've given praise to her work. Over time, I have mellowed out a little, and I don't think it's nearly as good as I thought it was, but I still think it's an enjoyable pilot with plenty of merit in terms of visuals, characterization, and heart. Gay spiders notwithstanding. Meanwhile, Helluva Boss is something that I think has a lot more going for it. While there is absolutely an audience for the kind of lore-heavy, story-driven show Has-Been is trying to be, I found Helluva Boss's more episodic-ish and character-driven stories to be far more interesting and entertaining. Obviously not without its fair share of issues, but I had a lot more faith in Helluva Boss after its pilot rather than Has-Been Hotel. As of writing this video, we currently have 5 episodes of the actual show here, and overall, I like it, but just barely. First though, I'd find it appropriate to talk about what the show does right. This is obviously not a way for me to gain favor with you, the viewer, when I start criticizing the show you like. Okay, but real talk, I've seen what can happen when you don't exactly make a good first impression with your criticism of Vivzi's work.
My drugs!
Haha, funny joke, oh my god, drugs, oh my god! We had the
Yep, that seems about right.
Has-Been Hotel is absolutely riddled with juvenile humor.
You tell him, James, that time you showed your dick and balls to children was a right knee slapper. Here's what Helluva Boss absolutely does right. The animation and art direction in general is stellar across all of Vivzi's work, but Helluva Boss is definitely where it's at its most consistent. There are moments where it can feel a little static, like this scene from episode 5, and the animation quality itself inconsistently changes between acceptable to genuinely amazing, most likely due to it being a web animated show without as much coordination as the actual TV show. I said coordination, but overall, it's much more consistent than Vivzi's previous work. In terms of characterization, the show absolutely succeeds. No two characters feel the same, and each line of dialogue is practically oozing with personality. That sounds fucking gross, hold on. Is filled with personality. There's not a single moment where I feel someone acts out of character, and the more grounded and emotional scenes just feel like an extension of the character's emotional palettes, as opposed to them suddenly throwing everything out the window and acting like a murderous psychopath. It's been 2 years and I'm still pissed off about that. For fuck's sake! Another thing that the show has over the genocidal misadventures of Stardolph Hitlerfly is that it manages to blend comedy and character development together in a way that doesn't feel unnatural. It doesn't feel like tonal whiplash at all, and characters like Blitz and Stolas, who begin as overly comedic douche canoes, have their characters wonderfully explored and expanded upon in ways I honestly didn't expect. Aside from those things being the show's greatest accomplishments, the voice acting is pretty good. You can never go wrong with Richard Horvitz, and that is a fact. This is not an opinion. You cannot deny the beauty of this man.
Coochie.
And the world building is alright, I guess. It's a little too early to tell, but I do have some issues with it. Overall, I like Helluva Boss. It has a lot going for it. But I'm about to ruin the fun. Cartoonshi, are you serious or are you Jay? Don't worry your indiscreetly placed piercings, fellow college students. I'm not laying a finger on the LGBT rep because I simply don't care. This is not another video to add to the totally real alt-right pipeline, which is a term created by neoliberal fascists who don't know how algorithms work just to politically divide us even further than we already are. The show does not get any criticism or praise for including gay. It's something I recognized and went, oh, that's neat, then never thought about again. I have actual issues to talk about here. If you wish to ship the Mexican ghost of the Clussy and debate the ethics of allowing gay spider people into society, then please do outside of discussion pertaining to this video. And no, I am not going to be talking about the fact they have some of the worst fucking fans in the world, because they're completely irrelevant to what I'm talking about, and I'm sick of people having this dipshit mentality of going super in depth on the show's fanbase as if it somehow applies to the show itself. We good? Twitter defense matrix deactivate. Now it should be worth mentioning right out of the gate that I'm a complete fucking dunce who spends most of his free time these days playing TTT Skyscraper and simping for virtual women, and that some of the stuff I say in this video will be argued a fair bit more subjectively than my degenerate audience is used to, and that some parts of this video is just for a laugh. Unless you agree with what I'm saying, in which case I am a certified genius. Helluva Boss has plenty of problems from its structuring, its pacing, so on and so forth, so I feel it's necessary to go through every episode, starting from the pilot to the most recent episode as of writing this video. This isn't exactly a scathing critique, but it's more or less a bunch of annoyances in the show's writing that holds it back from its true potential. But before we dive into the show's pilot, I have an announcement to make. Have you ever wanted to give me money? I shall rephrase accordingly. Have you wondered how much I earn from making garbage content?
Nothing. Literally nothing.
Well, I now have an official Patreon if you ever wanted to donate. If you want weekly-ish progress updates, be able to see my videos early, or simply want to send me some cash to support my endeavors, then feel free to donate if you so desire. I am not holding you at gunpoint here, it's completely optional. Even if I do have a slowly dying PC, books to buy for literature A-levels, nah, I'm not desperate. Click the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Please. Please do it, you cunts. I need the money.
Money, 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 money.
Lululand, Lululand, everybody sing along with the Lulu band. Every boy, every girl, every woman, every man loves Lululand.
Now I know what you're thinking. You can't judge the pilot! Well, I am, and I feel it's necessary. Keep bumbling. Helluva Boss's pilot, compared to a lot of pilots, is a pretty strong start. The characters are quickly established and make an impression, the animation and art is easy to follow and look at, we're told what the show is about and what it's trying to be, the jokes mostly land, that's an important point to make when it comes to a Vivsy Pop cartoon, trust me.
And what can you do, my effeminate fellow?
I can
Overall, it's solid, but definitely has noticeable problems. For starters, narrative structure and pacing is messier than Trisha Paytas's hypothetical hymen. Helluva Boss's pilot relies heavily on cutaway gags, which reminds me of the time Family Guy used to be good.
Funny, man.
In all seriousness, Helluva Boss's cutaways aren't nearly as bad as modern Fox writing, even if it is largely carried by swearing and screaming, but as I sat there tossing stones from my glass house, I also picked up on the fact that they tried to cram a lot of details into these cutaways, which is understandable for a pilot after all. But there's having lots of details, and then there's having a cutaway to introduce a character, in this case it's Luna, the random OC that Vivienne had lying around. Seriously, she sticks out more than the collective dicks that are pulled out when she's granted screen time, showing previous events to introduce her character, and then interrupting her cutaway to show another cutaway of Blitz stealing the book they need to get to Earth, then cutting back to the Luna cutaway for a 2-second screaming match, and then having another cutaway to introduce Stolas, which at the end turns out to be a continuation of the previous cutaway just to make the point that Luna is rude to people. What in the crusted anus is this structure? As collateral damage, the pacing is also put right through an unstable ringer and has more bumps and folds than a college civil rights activist. Whoa, can you tell that I want to drop out yet? Fuck, my life is a mess. And it makes for a narrative that is just barely cohesive. There are plenty of moments to catch you off guard, like the IMP ad suddenly being interrupted by the imp screwing up a mission, which cuts to a hospital scene with humans, and then ends with the commercial resuming. It's definitely funny, but like, I thought we were watching the commercial? Was that part of the commercial? Am I being pernickety? Maybe. After all, I still found the scene funny in a similar vein to that of a cartoon tuber using a very hilarious Wojak for their imaginary enemies. But there's a lot of pacing problems here for something that's only 10 minutes long. I will say that I do appreciate them finding a typically expected runtime for a television series though. 10 minutes. Hazbin Hotel is a half-an-hour pilot, and I don't mind how long it is, but only if it's justified. And with the sheer amount of unnecessary crap Hazbin tried to squeeze in towards the end, that runtime could have been 22 minutes at least. Helluva Boss is a lot more streamlined, which makes sense as it's comparatively a much simpler show, but I see it as an improvement. Other than the pacing and structural problems though, I'm probably gonna have to get into subjective territory. Kind of. Hey, remember when people got mad at me for the Steven Universe Future videos, where I said the show objectively fails when it comes to writing jokes despite being painfully unfunny myself?
You wanna see me do it again?
No, not really, it's not the same. Helluva Boss actually attempts humor this time around, as opposed to just randomly making a character say something casually quirky with no thought or build-up.
Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, and I have been cooking up a dream of our own.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
I will never understand how this was meant to be funny, and a lot of the comedy simply comes from recognizable banter between the characters. That's an okay setup, that can work. And it does, for the most part. A trademark of Vivsy's work at this point is that basically every character shouts vulgarities like a Tourette's-ridden sailor or an angry Englishman, and that can be funny. But the part where things become somewhat subjective to me is that the swears in Helluva Boss and Hazbin Hotel seem to just be thrown into the majority of sentences to save a joke that wasn't very funny to begin with, and that ends up making the joke come off as less of a dud and more of a juvenile dud. From what I've seen for a lot of things I've watched, swearing is at its most comically effective if it is used to emphasize an emotion, like anger or the ridiculousness of a moment. Now that I think about it, that's basically just panty and stocking. That show is fucking bizarre. Oops! Has been Helluva Boss on the other hand, just tend to cram swears into sentences or jokes that would have worked fine without them. And that's a trap that I have definitely fallen into myself when writing and trying to be funny in general. It's a hard thing to nail. Thankfully, the pilot doesn't have nearly as many, frankly, irritating sex jokes as Has Been Hotel did. I get that adult shows have the excuse to make these jokes because of their age rating, but it feels like they're being made for the sake of being adult and nothing else. There is literally no punchline other than this. That's literally it. Other than that, this is a pretty damn solid pilot, all things considered. It's not earth-shattering stuff, but it's not trying to be. It's a simple, character-focused sitcom-style show, and I can dig that. This is the start of the actual series. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, typically a pilot's purpose is to be a more advanced pitch for your show and to give people a taste of what you can create. Helluva Boss's pilot introduced us to all of the characters, but it's just that, a pilot. And this is where one of the show's biggest problems comes into play, the episode and story structure. Now, there's a certain underground show made here in the UK, it's quite obscure, you probably never heard of it before, it's called Shitposting Out of the Way. There's a pilot for Sherlock that's basically just a more bare-bones episode of the main show. It's far more streamlined, makes a lot more sense, and doesn't make me miserably anticipate the travesty that is Stephen Moffat's writing, as I know there's no official sequel to it. Now, if you were to watch the show itself from beginning to end, you'd never see this pilot, or have any idea it even existed as it's not a part of the official episode list. The actual episode 1 sets the stage for the interconnected story it's trying to tell, by bloating an otherwise cohesive plot and turning it into an unintelligible mess that tries desperately to be smarter than the audience by obscuring information from them. Now, why have I brought up this infuriatingly smug pile of unmitigated dog shit into a video about Helluva Boss? Well, they don't share the exact same issues, but if you were to watch the official series of Helluva Boss, you wouldn't be getting the pilot, as by all technicalities, it doesn't count. Which means you aren't being properly introduced to the characters like last time. Along with this, episode 1 of Helluva Boss, while it isn't trying to be a smugly written thriller like Sherlock, it's the start of a more story-driven kind of, but at the same time not really, but also yes show. I'm having a stroke, but not really, but also yes, but kind of, but also no, please send help, 999 help, which is a lot more different than the sitcom-styled episodic show that the pilot suggested we have. You can call this a nitpick if you want, because in all honesty, I'm fine with Helluva Boss being a lot more focused on character development and storytelling, but that's kinda what Has Been Hotel was supposed to be of its pilot, guys, and I thought Helluva Boss was meant to be the fun spin-off show. Regardless of your thoughts on that, it's still odd that the first official episode isn't really an introduction to the characters and world of the show. It's made in a way that acknowledges the pilot's existence, but at the same time doesn't. Like, was it really that much to ask for an alternative version to the pilot with just a few more bells and whistles? I'd be down with that personally, it'd make the episode and story structure make a lot more sense. Okay, massive tangent over. Episode 1 is... it has its moments, and it's definitely not bad by any means. Compared to the first episode, the art and animation is bloody stunning, there's great character chemistry, the soundtrack is surprisingly enjoyable, and the narrative is simple and easy to understand. While it is the starting point for a more story-driven show, it does act as something I'd expect from an episode of Helluva Boss. However, the main problem with this episode stems from the, I'm just gonna say it, lazy jokes. Like, there's having a few lines with sexual innuendos, and then it's acting like a child running around a playground screaming every cuss word and racial slur he heard his dad shout when Italy won the Euros this year.
Now let's go lick some ass!
The expression is kick some ass. Blitz.
They were genuinely proud of it. Not even the twat-tastic reaction channels found that funny, and that's really saying something. Then, like, there's this utterly bizarre line from Blitz that feels so unironically desperate for a laugh that it's almost sad.
Have a good wank-off session, Moxie?
Excuse me?
Look, I don't care where you come in the living world, just come to your job on time.
And sadly, this is the average joke you'll be getting throughout this episode. And I say average and not every because number 1, that's far too disingenuous even for me, and number 2, there is stuff here that works.
Not exactly how it works, ladies. Sorry, your fire doesn't really hurt us.
See, that's alright.
But I mean, I could fake it if that'll get your dick hard.
Oh, for fuck's sake. And there are some nice little visual gags. This one is a little immature, but I found it mildly amusing. What I think they were going for with this episode was giving Moxie a much needed confidence boost and to play with his innocence a bit. Moxie is the only character in this world besides Charlie that isn't a total shitbag in some regard, but unlike Charlie, this tends to backfire for Moxie, and after jeopardizing the mission, he learns to break free from that innocence and get the job done, while still being a kind person. If there's one thing I'll give Vivzy credit for, she can write pretty decent character arcs and self-contained stories that are around 10 minutes long. Other than that though, not a great start. I would have preferred an enhanced version of the pilot for much better narrative cohesion, but that's just me. Thankfully, episode 2 is really good. Like, really good. Dare I say it's some of Vivzy's best work. Not without faults, but the quality jump in terms of writing from the previous episode to this is staggering. The episode not only looks and sounds amazing, has more variety in the joke department, etc., but it did something I did not expect this show to do. It made me care about the characters, specifically Stolas and his daughter Octavia. Dare I say it's kind of emotional? Now, I didn't cry or anything because no way you're catching me being a pussy on the internet. Ignore that, and it's not like this kind of situational character arc is new or anything, but Stolas, a previously heavily comedic character, is humanized amazingly here, and the vocal performances give the dialogue that much more weight. You can call it a cheap shot to use a broken father and daughter relationship as a plot point, as it's relatable to many people and has been done plenty of times before, but I'm just stunned at how they executed it. Octavia should also be an example of how you should be writing teenagers during these kinds of stories. A lot of stories have this retard mentality where the teenager does things that are really selfish and stupid, and it makes them a lot more unlikable as a result. How did this footage from Mitchell vs. the Machines get here? Octavia is rude and disinterested, but she's stuck in the middle of her father's broken marriage and seems to be rather depressed with life as it is, only to be taken somewhere she doesn't want to go due to bad memories and eventually breaks. That's a very realistically written teen, honestly, and her conversation with Stolas is very, for lack of a better flowing word, emotionally resonant. I actually care for these characters, and that alone deserves a ton of praise. So to the musical numbers, you just couldn't keep them out of the fucking show. With the first one, You Will Be Okay, being absolutely incredible, and the second one, Lululand, just being catchy. I swear I've heard Vizzaroli's voice somewhere before. Alex Brightman? How the hell did you manage that? Overall, great episode. Hi, my name is Cartoonshi and I like ruining things. Let's start with the story structure. It came off as odd to me that the second episode of the main Helluva Boss series was not only dedicated to Stolas of all characters, but it also felt like we were getting something like this awfully early into the story. This feels like an episode that should have been made later down the line as opposed to like 2 episodes in. And I understand why it is. They don't have the budget for a 24 episode TV show, as it's a web series, and I'm sure most of Vivzy's money is being poured into Has-Been right now. But even if they were to have this emotional character development heavy story rather early on, why choose Stolas? Stolas is a comedic side character, and at this point we'd only seen him 2 times prior to this, where he shows up for a minute, talks Blitz into having, and inflects his bestiality by hornily screaming racial slurs into Blitz's ear. And come on, if every single instance of the word fuck is okay, then you know what he's actually saying behind the censor bleeps.
I want to type in the chat, Alex is a stupid.
So while I'm happy with Stolas being developed like this, the placement of this episode in the current order is a little odd when you think about the story structure. Providing some hints to Blitz's past is totally fine, as it's simply a hint. But fully fleshing out a character before they've had ample time to breathe or have had enough time for the audience to become familiar with them makes the story feel rather rushed, and it is. It absolutely is. Especially when you completely remove the pilot from the equation, as it technically doesn't count in the official episode list. Also, the plot kind of falls apart the more you think about it, I guess. It's centered around Stolas needing to hire a bodyguard to protect him and Octavia, so he calls up IMP. But in episode 5 sort of establishes that demon royalty can't be killed without specific and rare weaponry, and that the people who are trying to murk Stolas the whole episode are just comically disabled. Writing future episodes in a way that contradicts what you've done before can lead to a lot of problems, guys. Don't do this, it's really fucking aggravating. They're like 3 episodes apart. Other than that, Millie and Moxie have a side plot with no bearing on anything because they really didn't need to be here, with some soft plagiarism from Despicable Me, but somehow 2 times as bad. But whilst Moxie's being taught the subtlety of Sneed, I'm having a hard time keeping up with everything the episode shows because of the godforsaken pacing. This was also an episode 1 problem, but every episode onwards besides episode 5 was pacing that jumps up and down as frequently as Hereditary with Parkinson's. And I know it's because of the episode length. They want to keep it close to 10 to 15 minutes, that's fine. I want to be able to fully appreciate the story with a comfortable pace that slows down or speeds up gradually depending on what's happening. Not be presented with a story that is so inconsistently paced that it might as well be an ADHD endurance test. Other than that though, the episode is solid, minus a few nitpicks. The gunfire sound plays a second after Blitz starts firing the gun in this shot. Yeah, I have nothing else. Luna finally gets some much needed screen time where she isn't the reason for someone's sexual awakening. I spoke too soon.
There's so much porn!
The animation is stellar as always. I think the jokes are at their best in this episode. After the 2-minute mark, because it feels like they tried to meet some sort of quota for how many sex jokes they can make in the first 2 minutes.
Oh, you suck for life, do ya? Pink condom! Clutching onto that Beelzejuice bottle like it's the last cock in hell. So take your tampon race car somewhere else.
Choke on a sandpaper cock.
You better move that pussy wagon right now.
And goddamn, they managed to make me care about Luna. And not because I got to appreciate the fine details, but because they simply gave her character that extra push needed to become more than just a furry bait OC that was thrown in at the last minute. That's where my praises end though, because despite the episode being alright, it's a bit of a clusterfuck. Luna's character development is not nearly as compelling or well written as Stolas' was. Whereas Stolas worked because of the way they trimmed the fat of an already done concept, Luna's development is hinged on Blitz being overly protective of her, which has stopped her from making any real friends or exploring relationships. And while it gives Luna some needed depth, it's the bare minimum dad is an overprotective dick plotline. Oh, I'm sorry, there is some innovation here. Blitz is a cunt. A likable cunt, but a cunt nonetheless. And when he goes into overprotective dad mode, it makes the trope infinitely worse than it originally was. He gives Dracula a run for his money, and that is not an exaggeration. Or maybe it is. I don't know, they're both terrible. And the pacing is definitely at its worst here. They cram so many details into such a short time span that it has to keep moving constantly. And it can't stop to take a single breath. There's being fast paced, and then there's being inappropriately paced for the kind of story you're trying to tell. This also wraps back around to why I initially loved the concept of this being an episode like a comedic show without much heavy story content. Because this episode could have easily worked and would have been a hell of a lot better if it was 20 minutes and wasn't constantly fighting the damn time limit.
Punching the clock!
You were at work.
No, I was punching that clock!
Again, I don't mind the route they took with making the show more plot and theme heavy, but if you're gonna do it, you're gonna need the time to compensate. Let's move on. Well, I would move on, but that's really all I have to say for this episode. Well, I could point out that they attempted to give the world of hell some deep lore by hinting that demons can be punished if they cause too much noticeable activity in the human world, after Ferotica summons the fucking Kraken, and the IMP get a pass because the humans in this world are stupid degenerate people, such as myself, and mistake them for furry woodland creatures. So I'm assuming that it's considered a violation when humans don't mistake them for creatures, like this doctor from the pilot or the entire incident with the kid that they shot in the open. I don't really get how far someone has to go for it to be considered a violation, or if there even has to be a noticeable witness. You can call this a nitpick because we've really never been presented with the idea that some demon activity in the human world is punishable, and I'm just assuming things here. Overall, it isn't particularly great, but it's enjoyable enough despite its issues, unlike the next episode. Episode 4 is the worst episode of the series so far. It's not even a contest. Animation good, whatever. It has a plot that absolutely sucks. I'm about to go into 2019 Cartoonshi mode on this shit because the show wants to be story driven, so I'm treating it that way. We start with these heaven shits singing with some wonderful auto-tune for an advertisement as they are essentially the heaven equivalent to IMP. And we're shown this because Blitz is shooting televisions for bad advertisements like a sociopath, or for God's sake, it's fucking Sherlock again!
Piece of shit.
Mere seconds later, we are introduced to a Cuphead reject with a severe case of anorexia, who explains that he just died a few moments ago and that his partner, let's just call him Fat Bastard, survived, and he wants his partner dead so he can be brought to hell and be tortured. This will absolutely not fall apart and be forgotten about at the end of the episode. It's worth mentioning that for some reason Blitz is hesitant to just go down and kill Fat Bastard because the circumstances for Cuphead reject's death weren't his fault, and implies that they operate based on how evil a person is. And this is very interesting because just an episode ago, they got dozens of people to file in specific targets and seem to have absolutely no problem killing them regardless of their morality. And what makes this more interesting is that in the pilot they have some guy who murdered his wife and was spotted by a completely innocent jogger who reported him to the police. And the fact that he was included in the IMP advertisement implies that they literally killed an innocent person because the client just told them to. So what the fuck is this morality bullshit? They don't care. So they find Fat Bastard's house and the man attempts to kill himself. Feel you there, bud. But he is saved in the nick of time by the heaven shits who try to convince him that life is worth living, leading IMP to clash with them and try to convince Fat Bastard that life is terrible and that he should just commit, completely ignoring the fact that they can literally just pop a cap in his brain at any time instead of having this retarded screaming match, you fucking uber twats. The episode then devolves into the heaven shits taking Fat Bastard to various places to show him the joys of life, only for IMP to ruin it at every single time, which gets very boring and repetitive very quickly. Then one of the writers accidentally submitted a personal death threat they were going to send to a Republican senator, and Richard Horvitz just reads it out completely unfazed.
And you three are so superior to us just because we want some selfish, greedy, authoritarian capitalist to keel over dead!
Die, you piece of shit!
Eventually they have a brawl that just sort of happens with no real grace, and then the heaven shits accidentally kill Fat Bastard, which gets them banned from heaven despite the dear thing not having seen what just happened. Okay. They get back to hell and Blitz is worrying that Fat Bastard is going to heaven because moments before his death he wanted to live again?
Fucking what?
He was enjoying being a shitty person, what the fuck are you talking about? And then, surprising absolutely no one, he shows up with the Cuphead reject who is suddenly thrilled to finally have his friend back, despite making it abundantly clear that he wanted to torture him earlier on in the episode. So that fell apart rather quickly, and then the episode ends. I think it's pretty amazing that this episode was so bad that even devoted fans of the show utterly despised it. It has an absolutely terrible structure, the plot makes absolutely no sense. I don't think I laughed a single time since the jokes felt insanely forced. I'm doing the thing with the glass houses again. There are plenty of things that just don't make any sense or are utterly pointless. We didn't need a second full advertisement for us to watch of a pointless side character that shows up at the very end for a shitty joke, just to show Blitz shooting another TV. We didn't need another montage of the heaven shits and IMP going head to head and how much they can fuck each other over. The final battle just sort of happens, and somehow it manages to contradict what very little lore and rules we actually have for this world. It's a pointless, unfunny, messy dumpster fire, and I get what it's trying to do. It shows that heaven isn't uncorruptible and tries to add some lore, as the alternative point of the series is to give Has-Been some lore building, which is very problematic for reasons that will be clearer when Has-Been is finally out, but it is not executed well in the slightest.
You suck. You're a poopy head. Can we spell it out? You're a...
Why do demons care about capitalistic exploitation? Was I actually right about the death threat to the senator thing? It's the most forced social commentary I've seen since the last time I watched a bread tuber. I get that they're trying to make the mother of all omelets here, Jack, out of what limited time they have. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I hate having to use time constraints as an excuse for poor writing. In conclusion, don't fuck with this time code. Thankfully, episode 5 is about on par with episode 2 in terms of greatness. Now, the pacing is still an absolute shambles, but everything else about the episode just clicks. I think it follows a fine enough structure, the new characters are all entertaining, I loved Stryker. How the hell did they get Norman Reedus on this? That's ridiculous, but I am not complaining. Hey, I don't care if I'm a virgin, I can simp for whatever character I want. Unfortunately, talking too much about the submissive and breedable Southern girl will get my channel taken down. Rest assured, Southern Imp is best imp. Moxie, Millie, and Blitz get developed in this episode. Well, Millie not as much, but Moxie and Blitz for sure. Moxie's arc seems to be a direct continuation of his arc from episode 1, where there he learned not to compromise his objectives with his innocence. Here he is given a much needed confidence boost, and yeah, learning to be yourself isn't exactly a compelling arc, but it works for Moxie. Blitz on the other hand has his insecurities completely exposed and manipulated by Stryker, and while Blitz fakes taking Stryker's offer to buy Moxie enough time to grab his gun, I feel there's a part of him that genuinely considered the offer. I mean, his expressions here are clearly not being shown directly to Stryker, so I'd say it's implied. The comedy was also far more consistent in how it was written this time around, and for me, most of it worked. There are still some groaners here, but other than that, good stuff. The episode ends with a surprising, but honestly really funny cliffhanger, and I genuinely want to see what happens next. It was a great episode, doesn't reach the emotional highs of episode 2, but it does what it sets out to do, and I believe they executed it rather well. But I still have my fair share of grievances. The animation in this episode is very inconsistent. Now, it's not bad. I genuinely think some of the shots and scenes in this, along with the lighting and detail, are among some of the best out of the series thus far. But in between all of that, you can definitely tell that it was animated by different people at points, and yeah, no shit, every show is. But if it's glaringly obvious that some scenes are super high quality and then others are like this...
What? do you want, sir?
Then that's a bit of a problem. Also, really not a fan of how much the show tends to undercut Moxie's victories. I get that he's a comic relief character a lot of the time, but my man finally has a moment to be a badass and show how much he's grown, only to be kicked in the fucking face for a joke that really doesn't work. Or in episode 1, where Blitz says this to Moxie right after he just saved his life.
Have a good wank-off session, Moxie?
Along with having him be fucking traumatized after an entire family is blown up. I get he's comic relief, but these jokes just feel like cheap undercuts. Like, for fuck's sake, just let the man live. There's also this really dumb retcon that nearly sort of ruins episode 2. Moxie and Stryker are both aware that specific weapons are capable of killing demon royalty, which in this case is Stolas, as Stryker intends on assassinating him per his wife's request. So why the hell did he care about him and Octavia being assassinated? They can't do anything. He's perfectly capable of defending himself. Did he honestly just bring Blitz along for the ride because he was thirsty? Can we add gay owl to the list of things that should fuck off? This is about on par with episode 4's morality shit that made me want to sit on a pencil. There aren't even that many episodes and yet there are big contradictions being made that just take me out of it. Can we stop with this inane bullshit and just be consistent, please? But the biggest sin of all is of course the structuring of the story. We've been given a big reveal and cliffhanger on episode 5. Is the problem obvious? I'm repeating myself here, and repeating myself is useless, but it cannot be understated how much the show simply suffers from trying to be more complex than it's able to handle at a decent pace. You're being bombarded with this shit constantly, and they don't have the runtime nor the budget to make it work. And that's really the show's most fatal flaw, honestly. It has too much on its plate and cannot reliably pull off an ending that is going to satisfy people unless they somehow make it extremely long and pour all of the money into it. And even then, it's hardly enough time to really flesh things out in a digestible format without them having to rush through everything faster than J.J. Abrams after a pub crawl. So while episode 5 is great, it does give me a bad feeling as to what the show could turn into. Examining all of the episodes one by one, not counting episode 6, which is apparently coming out soon, Helluva Boss is a show that I find to be pretty entertaining and engaging at its best, but an immature mess at worst. This is a show that is trying to be far bigger and greater than it can reasonably be. Ladies and gentlemen, put your weapons down. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, but it doesn't make you good by default. One could say that Cool Cat Saves the Kids was ambitious. That's a bad example. You know what I'm talking about, right? I know that a pilot does not represent everything a show can become over time, but I believe they had the right idea for what a short web series could accomplish. Episodic, creative concepts to keep people entertained until Hasbin gives us the story content, you know, stuff like that. But they're clearly trying to have their cake and eat it too here. And while most of what they've done has miraculously worked, the show's utterly bizarre pacing is really dragging it down, and I think the show is really missing its true potential here. The story stuff, the early development before we get to properly know the characters, the ham-fisted plot twists. It's a show that's clearly suffering from having a lot of great ideas but not having enough time to see them through, which is something I've seen time and time again throughout the last decade of mainstream entertainment, especially within the last 5 years. But aside from that, I do have some more thoughts that I couldn't get to flow together when talking about the episodes individually. Helluva Boss's existence is due to a lot of things, but one of the main ones I believe is that it exists to give the world of Hasbin Hotel a lot more world building. Hasbin is probably going to have plenty of that already, but it's obvious just from subtle hints in the dialogue, different locations to implied classism, ideas such as demon royalty being unkillable without specific weaponry, stop being inconsistent before I sleep with my scrotum to the fucking ceiling please. All of this stuff is subtle world building without too much if any exposition, which is far better and more natural and has been straight up punching the viewer in the face with Alistair's backstory. But the problem with Helluva Boss doing this is that it has the potential to ruin Hasbin's quality when it comes out, especially when it comes to world building, as it'll be like a required viewing. Now this is a purely hypothetical scenario, but when I'm watching a show, a movie, or playing a video game, and I don't understand something, not because of my own comprehension of the writing, but because there is a crucial piece of information being hidden in a different piece of media that is required for me to get the full context of what's happening, then that's bad writing, and very poor storytelling. And there's a part of me that fears Hasbin might do that. Obviously there's a chance it might not, but what is the point of Helluva Boss as a spin-off if it isn't trying to be strictly comedic? I get wanting to develop the characters, but if you're gonna include these kinds of details in a spin-off series, when your own series should be doing this anyway, then isn't that kinda lazy? Again, you can criticize me for saying this is a purely personal problem and it might not even happen, but I've seen it happen too much throughout the years for me to simply ignore potential warning signs. Either that or I'm a second-rate schizoid, always a possibility. Speaking of things that were written by schizoids, episode 4 was such a gigantic pile of excrement that it really makes you wonder what they were trying to accomplish. Every episode before 4 had some kind of point, even episode 1, which can be viewed as a typical episodic adventure. If they had time to write and make episode 4 despite it adding literally nothing to both the show's appeal and its lore, then why couldn't they have used an episode slot in their very short series to tell a different story, develop a character, etc.? I just don't understand the thought process behind it. Like, did the writers chug battery acid before this? I don't know how many episodes this series is going to get, I can assume it isn't very many, but if they plan on making episodes like this with their very short time limit, then woo boy, I have a doozy of a tale to tell you, I tell you what.
Closing time, open all the doors and...
Overall, I think Helluva Boss is pretty alright. It does a lot of things shockingly well, the artwork and animation is amazing, the comedy, while it definitely isn't for everyone, has more hits than duds, the lore and world building is rather interesting, and I appreciate what they try to do with the characters, even if it doesn't work for all of them. And it has plenty of fantastic ideas that I would love to see them execute. Unfortunately, the show's ambitions are clearly working against it, and at times I didn't even know what the fuck they were going for. You can have one and done episodes that are simply meant for fun in your story-driven shows, but if you intend on telling a continuing plot of character development when you have only a short amount of time, you may want to look into making the most of your time instead of making episodes that fall right into filler territory. And even when your episodes aren't similar to what is expected of filler quality, it's always ideal to make the most of what you have. I think most people were very excited for Helluva Boss in the first place, myself included, because it was an episodic comedy show set in the same universe. It's a web series with a tighter budget than most animated shows. It's borderline impossible to properly execute all of its ideas. Maybe if they had a more streamlined story and stuck to being strictly story focused, then I could definitely see it working. But it also tries to stick to the episodic format at the same time, which makes it a very confusing show to analyze and figure out just what the fuck its problem is. I'm not ashamed to say that I like Vivzi's work. She's very talented and she's made plenty of stuff that I think is genuinely fantastic, but all of these big ideas just don't mesh well together. No Has-Been Hotel was picked up by A24, meaning the show is getting a much bigger budget, so we should see this problem cease at some point. But if it persists for All Has-Been when it becomes a full series, well, you know what I'll be doing. Okay, I've been strangely positive at numerous times in this video and haven't said many offensive jokes to keep my retarded B-tards and my server happy, so I gotta meet some sort of quota. Hell is turning the fucking spiders gay and it should be weeded out of the gene pool. Gay owls are fine, but y'all on thin fucking ice.